The question that was given to Vladimir Putin was, can you forgive people? And he said yes, but not everything. And the guy asked what you can't forgive. And he said betrayal. This is a story about his oligarchs that are coming up dead.
А вы умеете прощать?
Да. Но не все.
А что невозможно простить?
Предательство.
Вы так жестко сказали о предательстве. Вас предавали в жизни?
Ну, вы знаете, я не хотел об этом говорить, но по большому счету я не могу пожаловаться на то, что я сталкивался с каким-то таким серьезным событием, которое можно было бы назвать предательством. Нет, в моей жизни такого не было.
Боялись вас просто предать?
Трудно сказать. Может быть, я выбирал таких людей, которые на это не способны.
This is Sergei Protosenya. Until recently, he lived comfortably in France with an estimated wealth of more than $400 million. Money he made as a former top manager of the Kremlin-connected Russian gas giant Novatek. He's basically the textbook example of an oligarch. On Tuesday, he was found dead in a rented villa in Spain. According to the Spanish news outlet Telecinco, Spanish police found his wife and daughter dead with axe and knife wounds inside the villa, Protosenya hanging by a bathrobe in the garden. Spanish police believe this is an isolated case of domestic violence and say this is not connected to any criminal gangs or similar cases. This is Vladislav Avayev. He was the former vice president of the Russian Gazprom Bank, which is the bank connected to Russia's biggest oil company, Gazprom. It's Russia's third largest bank. Now, before that, he worked in the Russian office of the president and in the State Duma. On Monday, he was found dead in his luxury apartment in Moscow, along with his pregnant wife and 13-year-old daughter who had cerebral palsy. Russian state-run press says that all three died from bullet wounds and that 13 guns were discovered at the scene, including one that was found in Avayev's hand. They also report that the apartment had been locked from the inside, making impossible, in their telling, that anyone but Avayev could have been involved. Now, these could absolutely be totally unconnected cases of men killing their families and then themselves. What are the odds that two Russian oligarchs with connections to the Kremlin and the oil industry decide to kill themselves within 24 hours of each other? And what are the odds that four have since done so since Putin invaded Ukraine? The Ukrainian-born Russian oligarch Mikhail Watford, who made a fortune in Russian oil and gas in the 90s, was found dead in his $23 million mansion in England on February the 28th. And on the day after Russia invaded Ukraine, February 25th, the financial director at Russia's biggest oil company, Gazprom, was found dead in a cottage near St. Petersburg. Now, again, these could all be unconnected individual cases of murder and suicide. Both domestic violence and suicide are unfortunately common things around the world, but these cases deserve a little bit of context. USA Today put out an incredible report back in 2017 in which they documented 38 cases of prominent Russians who had died suspiciously in the previous 3 years. They included 10 high-profile critics of Putin, 7 diplomats, 6 associates of Kremlin power brokers, 13 military or political leaders involved in the conflict over eastern Ukraine. 12 were shot, stabbed, or beaten to death. 6 were blown up. 1 died of mysterious head injuries. 1 reportedly slipped and hit his head in a public bath. 1 was hanged in a jail cell, and 1 died after drinking coffee, end quote. The other 16 were reported as either natural causes or unknown. The Committee to Protect Journalists says that in the 22 years that Putin has been in power, 25 Russian journalists have been murdered. A whole bunch of them apparently just fell out of windows. On April 10th, I interviewed the Russian opposition leader, Vladimir Kara-Murza. He's been poisoned twice by the Kremlin. On April 11th, the day after we spoke with him from Moscow, Kara-Murza was arrested. Today, we got the news that he faces up to 15 years in prison for breaking a new law against saying anything other than the government narrative about what's happening in Ukraine. Potentially 15 years in jail just for telling me and you the truth. Which is not too far off from the story of the Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, who was poisoned in 2020 and was just sentenced last month to 9 years in prison on completely bogus charges. That kind of thing is just what Russia does. So again, domestic violence and suicide are a scourge of their own, and all of these recent murder and suicide cases should be investigated individually, but given Putin's government's history of making the people who are inconvenient to them disappear, it also makes sense to investigate the possibility that the Kremlin could be involved in these deaths. 4 Russian oligarchs, all with direct ties to either the Kremlin or the Russian oil and gas industry, all met violent ends just since this war began. Watch this space.
That doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Welcome to Straddled Events. On this channel, we bring you the truth. Sometimes the truth is quite ugly, unbearable, and you just don't want to deal with it. But on this channel, you're going to get it anyway. You are straddling between the fence of good versus evil, right versus wrong. And on this channel, we're going to tell you to do better. Let's go.
Not since Adolf Hitler has the world feared a dictator like Vladimir Putin.
This is the most serious crisis humanity has ever faced.
Hitler's insanity sparked a world war. Tonight, we're asking, could Putin, the tyrant, do the same?
You have an aggressive psychopath in the Kremlin with nuclear weapons and a taste for blood.
Will he stop with the carnage and destruction of Ukraine? Will anything satisfy his mad ambition?
There is something wrong there. There is a screw loose.
But should we be surprised?
For too long, we have let him get away with atrocities.
Tonight, we'll investigate whether Putin has lost his mind.
I believe that Putin is a good leader of Russia.
He is clearly psychologically deranged.
Has he unleashed a war that will turn global?
Don't kid yourself. That's called World War III.
We don't want this. We never wanted this. We never asked for it.
And we ask, where will it end?
Billions of people dying and humanity devastated.
He has said that Russian troops will not attack civilians.
You're talking rubbish, Tony. You're a disgrace.
You're sitting in your safe place and you are there to tell me what's happening in my country.
Doesn't Vladimir Putin think he's invincible?
Is there a force in the world right now that is able to stop Putin from doing what he's doing?
Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation.
You didn't answer my question, sir. If all of your political opponents are dead, in prison, poisoned, doesn't that send a message that you do not want a fair political fight?
Значит, по поводу того, кого убьют или в тюрьму бросят. Вот с политическими требованиями люди вошли в Конгресс США после выборов. 400 человек возбуждены, 400 человек возбуждены уголовным делом. Им грозит тюремное заключение до 20, а может быть, 25 лет. Их объявляют внутренними террористами. Обвиняют в ряде других
They are being accused of many other things.
70 было арестовано сразу.
70 people were arrested right there on the spot.
До сих пор находятся под арестом.
30 of them are still arrested.
Непонятно. Ведь
on what grounds? Not quite clear.
Из официальных властей штатов нас об этом не информируют.
Official authorities from the states are informing us about
одну из участниц, там погибло несколько человек, одну из участниц.
The late John McCain in Congress called you a killer. When President Trump was asked, was told that you are a killer, he didn't deny it. When President Biden was asked whether he believes you are a killer, he said, I do. Mr. President, are you a killer?
Look, over my tenure, I've gotten used to attacks from all kinds of angles, from all kinds of directions, under all kinds of pretexts and reasons, and of different caliber and fierceness. And none of it surprises me. People with whom I work and with whom I argue on the international arena, we're not bride and groom. We don't swear everlasting love and friendship. We are partners, and in some areas, we are rivals. As far as harsh rhetoric, I think that this is an expression of overall U.S. culture. Of course, in Hollywood, because we did mention Hollywood at the beginning of our conversation, there are some deep things that undoubtedly can be referred to as works of cinematic art, but more often than not, it's macho behavior, and that is also part of U.S. culture, including political culture, and it is considered normal. By the way, not here. It is not considered normal here. If this rhetoric is followed by a suggestion to meet and discuss bilateral issues and matters of international policies, I see it as desire to engage in joint work. If this desire is serious, we are prepared to support it.
I don't think I heard you answer the question, the direct question, Mr. President.
I did answer. I did. I will add, if you let me. I have heard dozens of such accusations, especially during the period of some grave events during our counter-terrorism efforts in North Caucasus. And when it happens, I'm always guided by the interests of the Russian people and the Russian state. And sentiments in terms of who calls somebody what kind of labels, this is not something I worry about in the least. You mentioned many individuals who indeed suffered and perished at different points in time for various reasons at the hand of different individuals. You've mentioned Lesin. Lesin used to work in my administration. I liked him very much. He perished in the United States, died or perished. I'm not sure which. We should ask you how exactly he perished. I regret to this day that he is not with us anymore. In my opinion, he's a very decent individual. As far as the others, we found some of the criminals who committed those crimes, and some are in prison, and we are prepared to continue to work in this mode and along this avenue, identifying everybody who violate the law and by their actions cause damage, including to the image of the Russian Federation. However, just piling everything together is meaningless, inappropriate, and baseless. If one sees this as a line of attack, then very well. Let me listen to it one more time, but I repeat, I have heard it many times, but this doesn't baffle me. I know which direction to move in order to secure the interests of the Russian state.
Next, we look at the fate of some of the Kremlin's enemies. According to one study, in the last 3 years, 38 prominent Russians have been the victims of unsolved murders or suspicious deaths. The high mortality rate has a long history, but critics say it's emblematic of how President Vladimir Putin runs today's Russia. In today's Russia, there are consequences to criticizing the state. Please tell protesters their rally isn't sanctioned. They're asking President Vladimir Putin not to run for re-election. This demonstration is sponsored by the opposition group Open Russia. In St. Petersburg and across the country, police arrested more than 100 protesters.
It is democratic opposition activists who are being arrested and given lengthy prison sentences. It is members of the democratic opposition who are being forced into exile, or harassed, or attacked, or murdered.
35-year-old Vladimir Kara-Murza is Open Russia's vice chairman. He's an outspoken activist, demonstrating against Putin and organizing protests. We first sat down with him late last year.
We believe in the rule of law, we believe in human rights, we believe that Russia should enjoy the same democratic institutions that the rest of Europe enjoys.
To try and create those democratic institutions, he teamed up with the man he calls his mentor, Boris Nemtsov, a former deputy prime minister who became the country's leading dissident. The two traveled to Washington to highlight the mysterious death of Sergei Magnitsky, a lawyer who exposed corruption among senior officials. Nemtsov and Kara-Murza convinced the U.S. Congress to freeze the assets of Russians believed connected to Magnitsky's death.
These people in the current Russian regime who rule like to keep, their money, their assets in the West. They want a vacation in the West. They send their kids to schools to the West. And this, personal accountability may well be the only thing that will make them think twice.
A little more than 2 years later, Nemtsov was assassinated a few hundred feet from the Kremlin's walls. His death was brazen and shocking. This is the spot where Boris Nemtsov was killed, and you can see the corner of the Kremlin right there, just a few hundred yards away, and you can see the memorial for him that's on this bridge. Today in Moscow, a court sentenced 5 people in Nemtsov's murder. Whether or not they were the masterminds, they permanently silenced Nemtsov's outspoken criticism. You live in Moscow. Kara-Murza believes someone used poison to silence him, too.
I started suddenly feeling really, really sick, and within the space of 15 to 20 minutes, I went from feeling completely normal, like I am now, to having a really rapid heart rate, sweating, palpitation. I started vomiting, and then I just lost consciousness. Kidneys, I think, went first, and it was the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the liver, everything just shut down. So I have no doubt that this was a deliberate attempt to murder, based on my political activities and motivated by my activities in the Russian opposition.
There are people working as opposition who are not targeted. What is the line that you apparently crossed?
There's a clear line between just saying things that are against the regime, and it's a totally different thing to go after their own personal interest, after their pockets.
The history of assassination goes back decades. In 1940, Leon Trotsky was killed with an ice axe. In 2006, crusading Russian journalist Anna Politkovskaya was murdered. And in 2014, Alexander Litvinenko, a former intelligence agent who accused Putin of ordering Politkovskaya's death, was killed by radioactive tea. Denis Voronenkov was a pro-Putin lawmaker who defected to Ukraine and became a Putin critic. In March, he was walking down the street in Kiev when a gunman shot him 3 times. His body bled out on the sidewalk in the middle of the day. Maria Maksakova is his widow.
I was dreaming about my first spring in Kiev with Denise. I was dreaming so desperately. First, I thought it's better not to be born at all when you lose something like that.
Maksakova lives in Kiev, where she's raising their son. In Moscow, she and Voronenkov were both lawmakers allied with Putin, and they enjoyed the spoils that come from power. But he'd also been an investigator who uncovered corruption in the Russian intelligence agency, the FSB. Who do you think killed your husband?
He had certain enemies, and these enemies are in the FSB. The anti-corruptional schemes that he would investigate from here, that is loss of money and loss of influence, loss of everything, of positions. And that is something that they would not let him do.
Russia calls her claim a fabrication, but his death fits a pattern. A once loyal family member becomes an outspoken opponent and ends up dead.
A mafia family, you can be born into it, you can be adopted into it. You can't leave it voluntarily. People who have tried to leave the Putin family voluntarily have not fared very well.
Masha Gessen is a Russian journalist, author, and prolific anti-Putin activist. You've been dubbed by some an enemy of the state. Are you an enemy of the state?
Well, I'm certainly an enemy of the mafia state, absolutely, yeah. I'm not an enemy of the Russian state.
Gessen was the first journalist blacklisted by Putin's Kremlin. She's also been targeted because she's a lesbian who's raising adopted children.
Это мой сын Вова. Его родила неизвестная мне женщина. А познакомились мы, когда ему было 2 года.
In 2013, she helped lead a video campaign criticizing an anti-gay propaganda law. It helped condone homophobia and attacks on gay Russians. And Gessen argues the law explains how Putin rules.
The autocrat needs everybody out in the street with flags aloft. The need that's primary is the need for mobilization. To have mobilization, you need to have enemies. You can have LGBT people as enemies today, and then you can have Americans tomorrow, and keep the LGBT people in your back pocket and then pull them out when you need them again.
And Gessen says above it all is a boss served by loyal lieutenants who don't need explicit instructions to launch attacks.
The patriarch of a family will say to you, do I always have to tell you what to do? Like, don't you know what the right thing to do is?
Does the Kremlin kill its political enemies?
100% sure not.
The Kremlin denied our interview request, but Sergei Markov, a member of Putin's party and Russia's National Strategic Council, reflects the Kremlin's defense, counterpunch, and embrace conspiracy theories, starting with the assassinated opposition leader Boris Nemtsov.
Who organized his killing? I strongly believe that it's terrorist organization SBU, and terrorism service of Ukraine.
Ukraine killed Boris Nemtsov.
Not Ukraine. Ukraine is country, captured by terrorists. But terrorists who captured Ukraine, they killed Boris Nemtsov.
But it's more than Nemtsov, right? Vladimir Kara-Murza has been poisoned twice. Anna Politkovskaya was killed. There are a lot of people who criticize the Kremlin who end up dead.
First of all, not too much. This atmosphere which is killing people exists. But this atmosphere has been created not by Vladimir Putin, but by Western countries against Russia.
For the people Putin targets, that argument is an attempt to distract.
Russia, surrounded by enemies, we should support even stronger than before our leader, etc., etc. That's a standard propaganda for any authoritarian regime.
Mikhail Kasyanov was Putin's first prime minister. In the early 2000s, the two worked together to pass much-needed economic reforms. In 2004, Putin fired him, and Kasyanov became an outspoken opposition politician, appearing alongside Boris Nemtsov and Vladimir Kara-Murza. Last year, a prominent Putin ally posted a video of him and Kara-Murza in crosshairs. But not all of the Kremlin's enemies end up dead. Some end up humiliated. How did they target you?
On television, they're blackmailing me and just creating dirty stories, etc., etc.
5 months before 2015 elections, state television broadcast Kasyanov having sex with his assistant. The video helped fracture his party.
They will try to destroy publicly, to destroy morally and reputation of all of us, and they're doing this quite successfully, and they will continue doing this.
And is there anything you can do to stop them?
We cannot do anything because we have no protection.
We have no free and fair elections. We have censorship in the media. We have political prisoners, more than 100 political prisoners now in Russia today.
1 year after he nearly died from poisoning, Kara-Murza got better and restarted his work. In February, he was a few hours away from boarding a plane to Washington, where his family lives for their safety, when he says he was poisoned a second time. We sat down with him and his wife Yevgenia in March.
But I couldn't breathe. And at this stage, when you're lying there, trying to gasp for air, I think I felt just life slowly going out of the whole body.
The oligarchs, is it possible that they have got some sway?
I think we are beginning to see splits within the elite. Signs of how uncomfortable some of the people around Putin are was evident at the surreal session of his Security Council, where he basically humiliated a whole series of his subordinates publicly. That's a sign of just how deranged Putin is now and how unstable this regime is.
Is there also one more solution to the world's most dangerous man? Would America, the West, come to consider him such a threat to peace and security that he would be personally targeted, taken out as just another terrorist? This is a bold question, but is it possible the West may view him as a terrorist and deal with him as they have other terrorists?
Yep, I agree with that. For too long, we have let him get away with atrocities. That if it had been some leader in the Middle East, he would have been bombed by now. You have an aggressive psychopath in the Kremlin with 6,500 nuclear weapons and a taste for blood. He invaded and annexed the Crimea in 2014. He got no response. He invaded and annexed parts of Georgia in 2008. He got no response. He assassinated people with chemical weapons in Britain. Virtually no response. He shoots down an airliner, MH17, over Donetsk. No response.
Yeah. If you were sitting with Vladimir Putin, and of all of us, you'd be the closest to doing that. Tony, what would you be saying to him?
I believe that Putin is the legitimate president of Russia. He speaks on behalf of the Russian people. I would be saying, keep your nerve.
if Tony really believes the metaphors he's talking about, and if I was an Australian and I had the honour of serving with the Australian military for a couple of years, you know, I'd be really ashamed that sort of rubbish that he's purporting there. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I thought this will all be over and people won't be killed. I bet you there are thousands and thousands of people killed, and most of them will be Ukrainian civilians, and we must do all we can to reduce that, and equally all we can to find some sort of peace. I think we're on the precipice. We're looking over an abyss that if we fall into it, you know, end of.
It's a war not between Ukraine and Russia. This is the war between values. This is the war between future and the past, between rebuilding the Russian Empire and a new world where countries can be free and decide for themselves, where the world's sovereignty means something. Because what we are facing right now is a real nuclear threat. What we are facing right now is a real humanitarian catastrophe. And what we are facing right now is a real screw up in all mutual trust between the countries.
We are at a really dangerous point in human history, probably the most dangerous since the end of the Second World War. And I wonder what future historians will write. Was 2022 the year that the Third World War began? All things are possible, including the very worst case scenarios.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
He is a Hitler with nuclear weapons.